Money and marginalization. Hello, my name is Ryley Macdonald, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about how monetary motives have been a catalyst for oppression and terrorism. So here we have a great question from a not so great philosopher. So you think that money is the root of all evil? Have you ever asked, what is the root of all money? Thanks, Ein, but we'll have to get back to you on that one. So my first example of a time where wealth played a part in oppression is the transatlantic slave trade. To give a brief summary of the circumstances, European settlers in America had the goal of creating a society that was efficient and profitable. Simply put, Europe didn't come here for the food, it came here to get rich. Now that's difficult for settlers to accomplish if they are spending all their money on laborers. This is where slavery comes in, because what could be more efficient than slaves? Here's a little insight as to just what slaves were to slave owners. Well, they definitely weren't considered employees. Instead, they were considered as property that held value, and in many places, slaves were the only source of private wealth, aside from land, which required extensive labor to turn a profit anyway. Slaves' value was based on many things, such as age, gender, physique, and also the skills they possessed. Eventually, slaves were everything to the Southern economy, coming in at an estimated $2.8 billion in value. Something as terrible as slavery must be difficult to justify, but that certainly didn't stop our oppressors from trying. Many slavery defense claims were made directly referring to my theme, but first, let me lay down some not-so-honorable mentions. Aristotle and his belief in natural slavery, the use of Bible chapters Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 15, and Leviticus 25, reference to the French Revolution's uprising of lower social class, and of course the minimalist argument that slavery is good for the slaves. I guess they didn't understand the difference between free room and board and forced captivity. Anyway, the Southern argument that reinforces my point was that slavery was too essential to the economy, as in $2,800 million essential. They pushed their defense even further by saying that because of the economic impact that abolishing slavery would have, it was just gonna be too darn hard to accomplish. In spite of the money that plantations made into millionaires, you would think that maybe paying for labor would have been an option, but I'm gonna bet that greed barred them from that idea. So why slavery as opposed to cheap European laborers? Well, it didn't start out with slavery, it started out with rip-off slavery, otherwise known as indentured servitude. Poverty-stricken Europeans that were seeking passage to the American colonies could have their voyage paid for in exchange for a specific amount of time working for those who financed their journey. So basically, slavery on a time frame. Once the indentured time period was up, the contract holder would then have to pay their freed workers a salary or find new laborers to indenture their service. As the demand of labor grew, so did the cost of indentured servants. Some landowners never even expected for their indentured servants to live out their contract, seeing as the conditions were harsh and the terms usually ran 4 to 7 years. So, the landowners promised more. They offered things such as land, food, and guns, among other commodities, and 7 years later they had the ex-indentured knocking at their door demanding what they were promised. So long story short, slavery was the easy way out, an ever-renewable and cheap source of labor. Cheap, if we're talking about money that is. The cost otherwise was much, much more. Okay, so with my next example case study, I wanted to take a look at things from a different perspective. We already know that the mannerism of the avarice can be remorseless towards humanity, but could poverty and hardship also be a recipe for people to act out in heinous ways? If you see where this foreshadowing is going, you know that we are going to be talking about the French Revolution. Okay, so it really should be called the French Revolutions because it was pretty much a circular argument. No? Tough crowd. No, actually, because it was a long episode of affliction comprised of a series of many terrible events, and spoiler alert, the king dies. To sum up what happened, King Louis XVI helped fund and fight the American Revolution to help the colonies gain their freedom. Thanks, Louis, but now you and your government is bankrupt, and France's Third Estate is not happy with you. Partly because they're broke and starving, but also because you decided it was smart to raise their taxes so you could keep your Maserati. Not to mention the fast-spreading idea of this thing called liberty. Anyway, these people you know as peasants just formed their own National Assembly, and guess what? They're coming for you, Louis. So how did the National Assembly justify killing basically everyone who stood in their way? Well, I think it's semantically safe to say they weren't so much looking for justification as they were justice, and trying to enact a new constitution was going to take something this guy Maximilian referred to as justice prompt, or what everyone else calls it, terrorism. Basically, when the pen didn't work, they went back to the sword, or the guillotine. Maybe the king should have just given them cake. Alright, so what was it that finally caused the commoners of France to uprise against their monarchist government? There is no single answer, but rather a combination of many factors that created the perfect storm. Not that they were a fragile group of people, but you know what they say, society is like a Jenga tower. You can only take away so much before it storms the Bastille. And that's not to say that people jump straight to violence as a means of getting their way. There was assembly, proclamation, petition, many paperback wins for the people. It was the word of the king mobilizing his military on Paris to shut down the assembly that finally caused them to throw the book at him. In conclusion, we can clearly see that the drive for personal wealth, or the drive for opportunities for personal wealth, can play a large part of constructing or finding the other within a society. We've learned that covetousness isn't the only monetary motive that exists, but also longing for equal opportunity can be motivation enough for some terrible actions to take place. So to answer Ein's question, money is not the root of all evil. Ultimately, the people who seek it are.